This is designed to impugn the credibility of the FBI, to undermine the investigation, to give the president additional fodder to attack the investigation. And it's a tremendous disservice to the American people who are going to be misled by this.
That's Congressman Schiff. He is the ranking Democrat on the Intelligence Committee. He is livid that Republicans released their memo filled with what he is and other members of the party that are sitting on that same committee, they call cherry-picked information, and they did not let Democrats tell their side of the story. The president also, he declassified the identities of the people who authorized the initial FISA warrant for surveillance of Carter Page. That an extraordinary move that very disturbs the intel community, including James Comey, who was the FBI director, and Sally Yates, who was the deputy attorney general. By the way, the president, he had fired both of them last year. It also exposes yet another inconsistency and, I would say, hypocrisy when it comes to this president. Now, let's go back to 2014. Then citizen Trump, he was against the release of the CIA torture report, and here's his tweet explaining why. The CIA report should not be released, puts our agents and militaries overseas in danger, a propaganda tool for our enemies. Pot meet kettle. Here to explain how FISA court works and where the Mueller probe could be headed, former federal prosecutor Roland Riopelle. And Roland, I want to get to the FISA first, but let's just do one thing. If people are a little conflicted about what came out and what it says or not, if there was any even pretense that this was a search for truth, A, Nunes and friends would have let Wray, as he pled, to come before them to share the intelligence so that they could have a fully formed opinion before they did this. They refused that request. Moreover, the staff of Nunes wrote this without full exposure even to all the intelligence, and the president, who greenlighted this to be released, never even read the full report before it went out, as we have even video evidence from the State of the Union. This was not a search for truth by any objective standard. This was propaganda and politics.
You know, I agree with you, Richard. And in fact, what I think we have here is just another example of Trump shooting his own foot off in the middle of the investigation. There's a real argument to be made that releasing this memo is itself another obstruction of the Mueller investigation. And let me explain why. One thing that the memo indicates very clearly is that Carter Page's phone was tapped for a year, beginning in October of 2016 and only ending in October or November of 2017, just a short time ago. During that period, it must be the case that the government was intercepting pertinent evidence of collusion with Russia. Everybody who talked to Carter Page in the last year on the phone now knows they were listened to, and they will stop talking on the phone, and that may well frustrate and impede and obstruct Mr. Mueller's investigation going forward. For all we know, Mr. Mueller has taps up on other phones based on the Carter Page tap, and those now will stop because those people will stop talking on the phone. It's a terrible disservice.
And if you just objectively sit back and say there's an ongoing investigation, and now you're going to the person of interest, in effect the president and those who surround him, and you're giving them basically some of the evidence that might be against them. But I want to get to the core of the argument. I've heard a lot of members, Nunes and friends, going today, and they're focused on the Steele dossier that says this is a politically funded and motivated document, and this was the whole crux here to get the FISA court to basically write a blank check to let them do whatever they wanted, violating individual citizens' privacy rights in the process. So, two parts to this, if you could, Roland. Explain both how the timing debunks some of this, but secondly, that's not how the FISA court works.
Okay, first, the timing. The timeline here, as is typical in these situations, and has been typical, frankly, in the whole investigation as we've monitored it, is really key. The first warrant to listen in on Carter Page's phone was issued on October 21st, 2016, just a few days before the election in the first week of November. So it's got to be clear to everybody that that first warrant was issued not for any political purpose, not to derail the election of Donald Trump or anything else. It was issued because there was probable cause to believe that Carter Page was acting as a Russian agent. And in fact, if you read this memo carefully, it appears that what happened, and based on what we know about the investigation generally, is that the FBI received information from the Australians about George Papadopoulos and what George Papadopoulos had told them about contacts with Russia. And then this Carter Page information came along from Mr. Steele later in October of 2016, and at that point he had confirmed what the FBI already knew based on the Papadopoulos information, and it was only at that point, after they got that additional information from Steele, that they felt they had enough to go to the FISA court, and they did so. And at that court, 4 judges, all Republicans, all appointed by Republican presidents, looked at the evidence and decided that there was sufficient evidence to believe that Carter Page was acting as a Russian agent, and they authorized the tap, and it was then re-upped for the following year, for the next 12 months. Every 3 months, the government had to go back and show that the phone was yielding relevant evidence. And every 3 months they did that for a year and got more evidence for that year. It's a pretty amazing story.
And as we sit here right now, we still don't know if that dossier was a part of it, the whole of it, if there was underlying evidence that also supported it as well. But the idea that in a criminal investigation, forget how it's procured, you wouldn't use potential evidence to help you in the course of your investigation is ridiculous. If anybody's even watched Law and Order, they know. You know, you deal with snitches, you deal with unsavory types here sometimes. Forget that the GPS, fusion document was actually initially funded by Republicans. Leave that fact aside. Why would you not use it if it helps in the investigation?
Well, and it appears from the memo itself that there was a disclosure made to the FISA court that Mr. Steele was paid to gather this information. So they knew he was a paid hitman for somebody to gather information on Trump's connection to Russia. Now, they didn't know, and it's not clear that the FBI knew in October of 2016 that Mr. Steele's money ultimately came through Fusion GPS from the Hillary Clinton campaign. It's not even clear the FBI knew that much about the money trail. All they knew for certain was that Mr. Steele had been paid for the information, and they disclosed that to the court. And the court, knowing that this guy was a paid hitman, obviously was going to take that into account and weigh the information he provided carefully. And as I say, it's clear from this memorandum that the information he provided was not the first information the FBI had obtained, indicating that Mr. Trump had a connection to Russia.
Roland, a couple more things of significance. To me, listen, people are disagreeing with me, say, oh, this will, the reaction that's happened today will be a chilling effect for the president. I say I've seen no evidence in the last year why this to him is not now ground, especially if he talks, I'm sure, to Stephen Miller or Sean Hannity to say, I move next on Rod Rosenstein. And then after him, I'm going to put somebody in and try and shut down the Mueller investigation. Forget the fact that they can go to the state court. They don't think that far ahead. I'm under the belief, tell me I'm wrong, that this is the justification he's been looking for so he can finally push more people aside.
I think that's entirely possible, Richard. I think it's also ultimately the justification for why he will never speak to Mr. Mueller, right? Mr. Mueller is now pressing to speak to Mr. Trump, and Mr. Trump is going to use this in the press to say, oh, the whole investigation is tainted, everybody's against me, it's not fair, I couldn't possibly speak to Mr. Mueller. That's coming, I'm sure, and you're absolutely right. It may be the first step in Mr. Trump's attempt to fire Mr. Rosenstein, to fire Mr. Wray, and ultimately to try to shut down the Mueller investigation somehow.
And I got less than a minute, Roland, but to me, I don't think I overhyped the consequences and the sad day this is for rule of law, checks and balances, etc. I know you don't throw around the phrase constitutional crisis casually, but the significance about what happened today and really the shame of it.
Yes. You know, what you have here is an executive branch of our government, the executive branch not functioning the way that it should. It is releasing, and the legislative branch is the same. They are conspiring to release information in an unprecedented way for political purposes only. And that is something we really haven't seen before. And it shows that these two branches of the government are not functioning normally. There's only one branch left, it's the judiciary. And I wonder how that one will hold up when Mr. Mueller serves, as I think he inevitably will, his grand jury subpoena, and Mr. Trump refuses to respond to it. Then we'll really see if the government's gone.
Yep. A historic and a disturbing day. But as always, Roland, appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
A pleasure, Richard. Good to speak to you.
You as well. Now, coming up next, closer to home, but yet still when it deals with justice, Monday, a huge day for the Prosecutor trial. We're going to take a look at what's happened to this point and also look ahead to next week with Dominic. He's been at the courthouse every step of the way. He joins us next.